When Robert de Niro appeared on Steve Harvey's show Unannounced, no one expected him to bring the host to tears with just one sentence and a gold cross. The studio lights came up, the band kicked in, and Steve Harvey strolled onto the stage like he had 1,000 times before. Big smile, bigger laugh. The crowd roared, standing to their feet as he waved, cracked a quick one-liner, and gave that signature look into the camera. Part mischief, part preacher, all heart. It looked like any other day. The set sparkled, the audience was electric, and the energy in the room had that easy, feel-good rhythm his show had become known for. People came here to laugh, to escape, to hear something real in a world full of noise. And Steve? He was the man they trusted to deliver it. But there was something else today, something just under the surface. It wasn't obvious. Not unless you were really watching. Not unless you'd seen enough people smile through storms to know when one's still rumbling behind the eyes. He laughed, sure. He hugged a few front-row guests like always, shook hands with a producer backstage, even tossed a wink at the camera crew. But just before he took his mark in the center of the stage, something happened. His hand went to his chest, quick, instinctive, and there it was, the cross necklace. Gold, simple, resting against a black button-up. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't new, but it was his mother's gift, his anchor. The thing that had been with him through failures, triumphs, valleys, and mountaintops. He didn't make a show of it. He never did. Just brushed it with his fingers, twice, lightly, like a man checking to make sure the ground beneath him was still solid. Then he cleared his throat, rolled his shoulders back, and smiled for the audience again. They didn't notice the pause. They didn't feel the weight, but he did. Steve took a breath, looked out at the sea of faces, and cued the monologue. The music faded, the lights adjusted, the cameras zoomed in. Another show, another day, another mask to wear. But the necklace stayed close, and whatever he was carrying, it came with him. The monologue started easy, just like always. Steve hit them with a story about something his grandson said the other day, one of those little kid truths that was funny and deep at the same time. The audience laughed, clapped, leaned in. He paced the stage like a preacher between scriptures, building the rhythm. The man knew how to work a room, always had. But then the mood shifted, just a little. Steve slowed down, his voice softened. The punchlines gave way to something more grounded. "I tell y'all something," he said, looking out at the audience, then glancing down for a second. "Life's a funny thing. You go through seasons, right? Good ones, bad ones. But there's always a lesson somewhere in the middle." The crowd quieted. He paused, like he was choosing his next words carefully. Then he smiled, not big, not for show. Just a small, tired smile, one born from truth. "I've had some seasons," he said, "storms I didn't think I'd make it out of. But somehow I did, and it wasn't luck, I'll tell you that." As he spoke, his hand rose again, almost without him realizing. It went to the cross on his chest, fingers brushing the edges, not holding it, not gripping it, just acknowledging it, like he was thanking it, or who it represented. The camera caught it, tight shot. No one mentioned it, but it lingered just long enough for people at home to notice. "I'm here today because of faith," Steve said, voice low now. "Plain and simple. It's the only thing that held me together when everything else was falling apart." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The ones who knew, knew. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman in the third row nodded and wiped her eye. A man near the back whispered, "Amen." Steve looked up, shook his head like he was brushing the emotion off, and snapped the moment back into gear. "Now look, I ain't here to preach to y'all," he said with a grin. "We still got a show to do. I got suits to sweat through and producers to confuse." The crowd laughed again, but something had shifted. The energy, the tone, the air. The necklace still rested against his chest, and the weight behind it had just made itself known. The monologue wrapped, the audience still buzzing from the laughter, but Steve could feel the shift. The moment of stillness hadn't fully left him. The cross still sat warm against his skin, like it knew something he didn't. He wiped a bit of sweat from his brow, cracked a joke about how hot the lights were for a man in a suit and a mustache with a mortgage, and the crowd lit up again. Classic Steve. But then, just as he was about to toss to commercial, a voice chimed in through his earpiece. "Don't wrap yet. We've got a surprise." Steve blinked. "What?" From offstage, a producer motioned toward him, trying to hide a grin. "Y'all up to something," Steve said, pointing toward the wings, squinting. "I don't like surprises unless they come in a check or a smoked turkey." Laughter. But the crew was moving differently now. One of the camera operators tightened their shot. Stagehands adjusted the background lighting. The band went quiet. Then came the announcement, just vague enough to be intriguing. "Ladies and gentlemen," the producer said through the speaker, "we've got a very special guest who asked to speak to Steve personally. He's not here to plug anything. He just asked for a few minutes." Steve raised an eyebrow. "What in the... who is it?" But no one answered. Just another smile from the wings, followed by a cue from the director. "Trust us, Steve," someone said. "You're going to want to hear this." The audience leaned forward, energy shifting again. Steve chuckled, rubbing his jaw. "All right now, y'all setting me up. This better not be some prank with a dude dressed like my uncle, or some old footage of me in them too tight jeans from the 90s. A few chuckles, but it wasn't a joke. Not this time. Steve looked toward the screen behind him as the lights dimmed slightly and the music cut out altogether. A deep quiet fell over the studio, that kind of quiet where everyone knows something is about to happen. And then the screen flickered to life. The screen steadied, the image came into focus, and just like that, Robert De Niro, live, clear, present. The crowd gasped, then came the eruption. Cheers, applause. A wave of disbelief rippling through the audience like someone had just brought a piece of Hollywood royalty straight into their living room. Steve's eyes widened. His smile broke wide and genuine. But there was something else behind it too. Not just surprise, not just excitement, something closer to disbelief. "Wait a minute now, hold up," he said, stepping back, hand resting instinctively on his chest, right over the cross. "Is this real? Is this real?" De Niro gave a small smile, a nod, calm, cool, every bit the legend he's always been. "Hey, Steve," he said, voice steady, unmistakable. "Thanks for letting me drop in." The audience went wild again, but Steve didn't move. He was still trying to catch up. "I can't believe this," he said, looking off stage. This man is one of the reasons I even know what acting is. Y'all serious with this?" He turned back to the screen, hands raised slightly, like he was trying to physically grasp what was happening. De Niro just smirked. "You know, I've been watching you for a long time, Steve. And I asked to be here because there's something I needed to say, something I saw recently that stuck with me." Steve's smile held, but his eyes flickered. There it was again, that subtle shift. The room didn't feel like a comedy show anymore. It felt like something else. Something quieter, something more important. He glanced down for just a second, hand brushing the cross again, and nodded. "Aye, aye then," he said. "You got the floor, Mr. De Niro." He tried to say it light, tried to hold the energy in the room, but even the audience could feel it now. This wasn't just a cameo, it was something deeper, something meant. And Steve, despite all his charisma, all his experience, wasn't quite sure what was coming next. But he was listening, and so was everybody else. De Niro didn't come to entertain. You could feel it the moment he leaned slightly forward on the screen, elbows resting on the table in front of him, his voice lowering, not for drama, but for intention. Steve, still smiling, tilted his head. He knew that tone. It was the same one older men used in barbershops when the laughter stopped and the truth came out. "I've been watching you for years, Steve," De Niro began. "Not just the funny stuff, not just Family Feud or the suits or the jokes." Steve raised his eyebrows slightly, the smile still there, but fading just enough to let sincerity in. "I've watched your interviews," De Niro continued. The moments where the crowd gets quiet and you say something real. When you talk about growing up, about falling down and getting back up, about faith, about failure. The crowd quieted with him. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Calm, intentional, like a man who wasn't reading off a script or there to play a role. He wasn't acting, he was telling the truth. I saw the one where you talked about being homeless, living in your car, praying for one break, and then not just getting the break, but carrying it with grace. Steve didn't speak. He didn't move. His hands rested on his thighs, fingers tapping lightly, the cross necklace now clearly visible against his shirt. And I thought, De Niro said, pausing, this guy isn't just a comedian. He's a man who knows. That was when the shift happened. The crowd felt it. The laughter that had started this moment had dissolved completely. You could have heard a pin drop between heartbeats. Steve looked up toward the screen, eyes locked in, jaw set. It wasn't a look of pride, it was something closer to reverence. Because when a man like Robert de Niro speaks like that, you don't interrupt, you listen. And Steve? He was listening with his whole soul. De Niro sat back for a second, his eyes narrowing like he was chasing a memory. You know, he said, voice rougher now, like gravel shaped by years of wind. I've been in this business a long time, and I've seen what it does to people, especially men who come from struggle, especially black men trying to make space for themselves in rooms that weren't built for them. The audience held their breath. Steve didn't move. De Niro continued, slower now. They'll smile at you, clap for you, put you on a magazine cover, but they don't always see you. Not really. They see what you do, not who you are. He paused, eyes narrowing just slightly. But I see you, Steve. A murmur went through the crowd. Not loud, just energy shifting. People turning towards Steve, whose face had softened now, lips pressed together in that quiet way men do when they're holding something deep in place. I've seen men get bitter in this game, seen them lose their fire or sell themselves out just to stay in the spotlight. But not you. You stayed honest, you stayed rooted. De Niro nodded. You walk with dignity, you speak with purpose, and you treat your platform like a calling. Steve's eyes glistened. No theatrics, no breaking down, just stillness, the kind that holds back a wave when it wants to break. De Niro's voice lowered again. People don't understand how hard that is, to keep showing up, to keep laughing, even when you're carrying weight nobody sees, to be the same man off camera that you are on it. A beat? That's not just talent, that's character. The audience, still hushed, began to nod, one by one. You could feel it, respect forming in the silence, not because of fame, but because one legend had just honored another. Steve's hand moved again, instinctively, gently, to the cross on his chest. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. Everyone in that room and everyone watching at home knew they had just witnessed something real, and it wasn't over yet. De Niro exhaled slowly, like he was about to say something he hadn't said out loud before. This business, it takes pieces from you, he said, sometimes quietly, sometimes all at once. His eyes weren't on the camera now, they were somewhere else, somewhere years behind him. You could feel the studio shift with him, everyone leaning into the silence between his words. There was a time, he continued, years back, when I was going through a rough stretch. Work wasn't right. Family stuff was complicated. I was angry more than I was present. Couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, just tired. Steve didn't move. His face was stone still, but his eyes, they were watching De Niro like a mirror. I remember one night, I couldn't sleep. Flipped through the TV just looking for noise, something dumb, something to take my mind off things. De Niro smiled faintly. But I landed on you. A few people in the audience shifted. Steve blinked slowly. You were on stage talking about failure, how every time you thought it was over, God was just setting up the next act. You said, "Your setback is a setup for your comeback." That stuck with me. De Niro leaned in now, present again. And I don't say this lightly, Steve, but that night, your words hit me harder than any therapist, director, or award ever could. It reminded me that I wasn't finished, that I still had something left to give. Steve looked down, jaw tight. De Niro paused. I don't think you realize how many lives you touch when you're just being real. That night, I was one of them. Silence. Heavy. Real. The kind that doesn't need applause to mean something. Steve didn't speak. He couldn't, not right away. His head was bowed slightly now, both hands clasped tight, knuckles pale. That cross on his chest, he held it with both thumbs like it was the only thing grounding him to the floor. The room was still. You could hear the hum of the stage lights, the soft rustle of someone adjusting in their seat. And then, his shoulders rose just a bit. A long breath. A held-back exhale. His eyes were glassy now, shining under the lights, not blinking, not breaking, but barely holding. He looked up at the screen again, lips parted like he wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat. He tried to swallow it down, but the lump didn't move. This wasn't the Steve people were used to seeing, not the slick host, not the comedian with the quick comebacks. This was the man underneath it all, the one who had carried loss and praise, fame and failure, all in the same body. His jaw clenched, just slightly. Then he looked at the audience, eyes scanning their faces, and back to De Niro. "You got me," he said quietly, voice low, raw. "You got me, man." It wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't dramatic. It was deeper than that. It was a man being seen and feeling the full weight of it land all at once. He sniffed, chuckled once, one of those short reflex laughs that people use when they're trying not to cry. Then he wiped his face quickly, as if the moment might pass if he just moved fast enough. But it didn't. And no one in the room wanted it to, because this wasn't TV anymore. This was real. And Steve Harvey, the man who always had the words, suddenly had none. Just the cross in his hand. And the truth of being understood in a way he never saw coming. De Niro's voice dropped even lower now. Not for drama, just truth. "I lost my way a few times." He didn't flinch when he said it, didn't dress it up, just laid it out plain, the way older men do when they're tired of pretending. There were stretches where I didn't recognize myself, thought I had to be tougher than I was, sharper, louder, and I was angry at the business, at people, at myself. He glanced down for a second, then back into the lens. "But watching you, Steve, the way you carry yourself, especially when no one's asking you to be that example, man, it reminded me of someone I hadn't thought about in a long time." A pause. "My father." You could feel the audience lean forward, not out of curiosity, but reverence. De Niro didn't rush it. He let the weight land. My dad wasn't famous, wasn't rich, but he carried himself with dignity, quiet strength. When he spoke, people listened, not because he was loud, but because he didn't speak unless it mattered. He nodded slightly. "And the way you talk to young men, the way you stop and tell them about worth, about God, about holding their head high even when the world's trying to break them, that's him. That's how he was." Steve blinked, and his grip on the cross necklace tightened just a little. De Niro looked into the screen like he was seeing past it. "And that cross you wear, it ain't just jewelry. That's something you carry, like he did, like men used to." There was no applause, just silence. The kind that fills a space when truth walks in and sits down. Steve opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He tried again, a small sound, half a breath. His jaw tensed, shoulders lifted just slightly, like he was trying to physically push the emotion back down where it came from. But it didn't go. Instead, it rose, slow and quiet. His eyes welled again, this time too full to blink away. He looked down at the floor, then back up at the screen. Then he reached for it. The necklace. He didn't just touch it. He held it now, lifted it, cradled it in the palm of his hand like it was breakable. His lips moved barely, like he was praying. Maybe just a thank you. Maybe something only his mama would have understood. Maybe nothing at all. And then the tears came. Not loud, not showy, just real. One rolled down his cheek, then another. He looked at the necklace, then covered his face with one hand, shoulders shaking slightly but silent. The kind of cry that doesn't ask for attention, the kind that only happens when something finally gets through. The audience didn't make a sound. No one moved, no one clapped. Even the camera operators held still. Because in that moment, Steve Harvey wasn't the entertainer. He wasn't the host. He was just a man who had spent his whole life being strong for everyone else. And now, for once, someone had looked at him, not the suit, not the smile, not the jokes, and seen the weight he'd been carrying all along. And in the quiet of that studio, under the hot lights and the unblinking cameras, he let it go. De Niro waited, let the moment breathe. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He let Steve have it, let the weight settle where it needed to. Then, when Steve lowered his hand and looked back up, eyes red but steady, De Niro spoke again, soft, sure, and all heart. "That cross you wear," he said, voice low, "it doesn't just represent your faith." He paused, like he wanted the next words to land in the exact right place. "It represents every person who helped shape you." Steve's gaze didn't move. He was locked in now. No defense, no wall. Just open. De Niro continued, "Your mama, your dad, the teachers who saw something in you when you didn't even see it in yourself, the friends you lost, the mentors who told you to get back up when you thought you were done." He leaned in slightly, not as an actor, not as a legend, just as a man who knew. "It shows you remember where you came from." Another pause. "And that's rare, man. That's real rare." The studio didn't move. Every eye was fixed on the screen, every heart sitting quietly in its chest. "People get success and forget," De Niro said. "They build platforms and build fences. But you bring people in. You reach back, you lift folks up. That necklace, that cross, that's not just faith, that's legacy, that's roots." Steve didn't speak. He couldn't. He just nodded slowly, eyes blinking back fresh tears. Because the truth wasn't just heard, it was felt. Right there, through that screen, across generations, across different walks of life, two men had reached each other. Not as stars, not as headlines, but as sons. Sons of someone who raised them right. Stillness. That's all there was. The studio, usually filled with whistles, whoops, laughter, applause, it was silent, sacred, like a church after the sermon, when the organ fades and people are too moved to speak. Nobody clapped, nobody cheered. Not because they didn't want to, but because they understood this moment didn't need noise. It needed reverence. One woman in the second row wiped her face gently with the sleeve of her cardigan. Another in the back clasped her hands and bowed her head, lips moving in a silent prayer. A man near the side of the stage whispered, "God bless him," just loud enough for no one to hear. And then, behind the cameras, one of the producers, mid-30s, blazer and headset, usually glued to a clipboard, just stood frozen, mouth slightly open. He turned to the stage manager beside him and mouthed one word, "Wow." The floor crew didn't move. The camera guys didn't adjust. Even the house band sat back, arms folded across their laps, some with mist in their eyes. Steve was still seated, not slumped, not broken, but changed, like something sacred had passed through him and left him a little lighter, a little more seen. And De Niro? He wasn't smiling. He was just watching Steve the way a father watches a son finally understand something he'd been trying to teach for years. This wasn't a show anymore. It was a moment. A rare, unscripted human moment. The kind no director can plan. The kind no camera can fully capture. The kind that lives in the quiet corners of the heart long after the lights go down. Steve stayed quiet for a few more seconds. Then, slowly, he looked up. Not at the crowd, not at the cameras, at De Niro. His voice, when it finally came, was shaky. Software, but solid. That cross? He paused, thumb tracing the curve of it. That cross was my mama's. A hush fell deeper over the room. She gave it to me the day I got my first real TV job, Steve said, eyes glancing toward the floor like he could still see her there, holding it out with her small, steady hands. Told me, baby, don't you ever forget who brought you through the storm. The words caught a little in his throat, but he let them out anyway. Honest, bare. He held up the necklace then, not like a trophy, but like a torch, like something sacred he was still being trusted to carry. I never did. He wasn't performing, he wasn't hosting, he was remembering every prayer whispered in a car at night, every yes that came after 100 no's, every door slammed in his face before one finally opened. She used to tell me, he continued, the light ain't always going to be on you, but God is. A few people in the crowd quietly wiped their eyes. Steve looked at the cross again, and then let it fall gently back against his chest. His hand didn't move for a moment. I wear it, he said, voice steadier now, so I don't forget who I was, and so I don't forget who I'm still trying to be. He finally looked up and met De Niro's eyes through the screen. Thank you for seeing that. The words weren't scripted. They came from somewhere deeper, the kind of place you only access when the noise fades and the truth walks in. De Niro didn't speak right away. He just looked at Steve, a long, steady look. The kind of look that didn't need to be explained, the kind only two men who've been through it can share. Then he nodded. Once. Firm. Meaningful. That's what I needed to say, De Niro said softly. That's all I came here for. A breath. Thank you for carrying that cross in public, not just around your neck, but in how you live. Steve closed his eyes for a second, like he was soaking it in, letting it settle somewhere deeper than his skin. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, smiling now, but not wide, just enough. The kind of smile that comes after a long cry, after the truth hits you and lets you breathe again. Man, he said, shaking his head, that means more than you know. The two men sat like that, one on screen, one on stage, but somehow sharing the same space, same air, same understanding. There were no applause signs flashing, no musical transitions, just presence. Steve looked down again at the necklace, then back up. You didn't have to say all that, he added, quieter now. But I'm real glad you did. De Niro shrugged slightly. Sometimes people think silence is strength, but sometimes saying what needs to be said, that's the strongest thing a man can do. And with that, the distance between them wasn't there anymore. Just two men, two lives, two paths full of pain, faith, fight, and redemption, meeting in the middle, if only for a moment, not actor and host, not guest and celebrity, just man to man. The screen dimmed. De Niro's face faded into black. No outro music, no dramatic swell, just silence, full and sacred. Steve sat there, alone at center stage, lights warm on his shoulders, the studio around him still as a held breath. He didn't speak. He didn't move right away. One hand rested on his knee, the other still holding the cross. Thumb gently pressed to the worn edges like it was the only thing anchoring him to the moment. He looked down at it, not like he was admiring it, but like he was speaking to it, like he was remembering the hands that gave it to him, the prayers stitched into every link of that chain. Then he looked up. Not at the audience, not at the crew, but into the camera, straight through the lens, past the screens, into the homes of everyone watching. And he said it softly. No performance, no emphasis, just truth. Some things don't need to be explained. A pause. His fingers curled a little tighter around the cross. They just need to be remembered. He held the gaze a beat longer, then let the necklace fall back against his chest, right over his heart, where it had always been. He didn't crack a final joke, didn't call for applause, didn't move to wrap the show. He just nodded once, eyes still misty, face calm, a man at peace with being seen, and then fade to black. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.